people's shirts or different ways, and you walk into a home, you'll just see the word blessed. What do you think that blessed really means? Because it's used throughout the Bible, and it is the title of our lesson today. So if someone says blessed to you, what's your first thoughts that enter your minds? None of you have minds, or what's the problem here?
Something that causes joy or pleasantness or kindness.
Okay.
They have everything they need.
The need, okay.
Family.
Family. Absolutely. We could just go forever with these terms, which are the results, basically, of being blessed, right? The results of it. Well, I thought a little bit about it, and it's not always material blessings, is it? It's not always material. In fact, some of these things you were telling me, health, family, they are not material things, but they are certainly part of the blessing that we'd have. We often say, which is absolutely true, United States of America has been blessed, right? And then we even sing, God, will you continue to bless America? So we use these words so much. Even thinking back, Jesus' statements in the Beatitudes, he'd say, blessed are you if you mourn. Blessed are the poor. And on he goes, and he would brings a positive statement out of something that would be negative, so we can get the idea that this blessing is not always like material blessing. Now our lesson today is called Blessed, and it's centered in Genesis chapter 30, and it is speaking of a man who we've been talking about. His name is Jacob. Jacob was chosen by God to continue to produce the blessing that God gave to grandfather Abraham. Out of all the people in the known world at that time, God came to Abraham and said, I'm going to choose you. And you, I am going to pour blessings upon. I am going to lead you. I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to give you descendants. I am going to give you wealth. I am going to bless you. And in turn, as I bless you, you are going to be a blessing to all the nations of the world, which includes us and includes the promised seed of the Savior, Jesus Christ, coming and in turn blessing us. But we're going to find out in today's lesson, as well as the whole life of Jacob, he was not always compliant. That's the word I chose to use, as he should have been. So we're going to begin to see how over the expanse of his life, as we're going to be studying it, we've been introduced to him already in our last lessons. We're going to find out that even though he is not compliant to God's perfect will at this time, that God's still going to bless him. God chose to bless him, and we're going to speak about that blessing. But what we're going to see today, too, we're going to see this thought. Even though Jacob was very immature in his faith, matter of fact, our last lesson, we didn't meet last week, but the week before last, we saw how he met God at Bethel. And before that, it was always, well, you were the God of my grandfather Abraham, and you are the God of my father Isaac, but you know, to me, you're just a creator. You're just a God, because God had not revealed himself personally to Jacob until that particular time that we talked about, when at Bethel he saw the ladder and he saw the angel of God speak to him and pronounce on him the same blessing that he had given to Abraham. So we're going to see that even after that experience, which he was changed, God changed his name. He was a changed person, because he said, oh, I have met God here. This is the place. And he said, I am going to name this place the house of God, Bethel, because I have met God personally here. He's revealed himself to me. We're also going to see that although there was a big transformation in Jacob's life, he still had a lot of growing to do. He had a lot of training to do. God had a lot of training to do with him. So I wrote this procedure. Through this procedures that we're going to see, God's going to teach, God's going to train, and God's going to discipline Jacob to be made into the image that God wants him to be, which at this point was to be the father of Israel. And as I contemplated the opening statement there, I said, likewise, born again believers, this same has to go through this same changing cycle. Obviously, we all wished that at the moment of our conversion, we would just be perfect, mature. And that doesn't happen, because that growth state is going to continue to the day we die or to the day the Lord returns, because we are constantly being changed. Matter of fact, listen to the verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. It says, and we also, who reflect the Lord's glory, are being transformed into his likeness. God's working with us. God's working with you. God's working with me. God's worked with Jacob, and we're going to be able to see that step by step. God had a purpose for Jacob, but Jacob was not always compliant. Like, okay, God, here I am, do with me with whatever. God had to change him, mold him, make him, and change him into what he do. So we're going to find out that there's some trials that Jacob's going to go through. And these trials are going to make and shape Jacob into the person that God wants him to be. So that's basically what we're going to see in today's lesson, some of the climaxing and some of the trials that Jacob went through and how that they did change him. Well, last week we didn't have a lesson, and if you read it in your book, it would have been the resurrection story, because last Sunday was Easter. So let's catch up a little bit in a way of review what has happened to Jacob so far in our lesson. When we last left Jacob, he was leaving home. Basically, it wasn't his desire to leave home. He didn't want to, but he left home for two reasons. For one big reason, he was fleeing, right? Esau says he had stolen the birthright through a very deceitful method from his brother, and Isaac pronounced it on Jacob instead of Esau, which made his brother angry, obviously, and he vowed that the day his father died, he would kill Jacob. So he left home for the sake of his life, but also he left home because his mother and father eventually was very, very disappointed over the two Canaanite women that Esau married, and said, we do not want our son Jacob to marry, so let's send him back to your home place, Rebecca, Mother Rebecca, and let him get a wife there. So he's on this journey. 2 weeks ago we had him on the journey. We found out he stopped for the night at a place that was originally called Luz, L-U-Z. But after hearing Yahweh speak the Abraham blessing and promise to him, and knowing that he was going to be that ancestral line that would be Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob was chosen, he renamed that place, as we've mentioned before, the house of God. What he did, he made a memorial stone. He poured oil on it. He marked the place where he had met God. Matter of fact, he said in Genesis 28, verses 10 through 12, something like this: how awesome is this place? And then he said, the Lord is in this place. And then he called it the very gate of heaven. So he really met God for the first time in a very personal way there at Bethel. Well, then he started out the next day and made a somehow 500 plus mile trip up to Haran, the home place of Abraham, and where Rebecca's home place is. which is now what would be southwest Turkey. So if you want to generally know where he went. Well, there he met Uncle Laban's daughter, who was named Rachel, at the well, and she was there watering and taking care of her father's sheep. Her father is Laban. Now, these names are going to come into play, so I hope you know them and recognize them. Laban is the father of Rebekah. So Jacob is now being sent to Laban, Uncle Laban, to get a wife among the people there that had stayed in Haran. So he met Rachel at the well, and she was watering her father's sheep. But Rachel takes Jacob home after that watering of the sheep, and Jacob is renewing the acquaintances and talking about family affairs and living there for about 1 month, working for Uncle Laban. And at that point, when they realize that obviously Jacob is going to stay for a while, Uncle Laban offers him a job with pay, to which now Jacob agrees to work for 7 years to work as a dowry, a down payment on the woman that he had fallen in love with or wanted as a wife, and that was Laban's daughter Rachel. The Bible will tell us actually in Genesis 29:18 that 7 years goes by so quickly, Jacob said, because of the love that he had for her. So for 7 years he worked faithfully, not getting money, not getting cash, not having a home, but living off of Laban's substance and working to pay this dowry to purchase, so to speak, the wife of Laban, whose name was Rachel. Well, next we find out that wedding plans were made after the 7 years was up. Because of the darkness of the night and the bride being totally veiled, the next morning the truth was revealed. He had married Leah, the older sister, instead of Rachel. And after approaching Laban, and one can only imagine the conversation there, another arrangement was made. And this arrangement was made: if you fulfill the wedding week, if you know anything about Oriental weddings, that wasn't just a one-day affair, it lasted for some particular time. This time, if he said, if you fulfill this wedding week, then after that week's over, you can have Rachel too. But you must work another 7 years to pay that dowry. So during these 14 years now, in just a couple verses in a chapter, 14 years has expanded in this time. During these 14 years, Jacob fathered what would later be called the 12 tribes of Israel. So he had this new, at this point, up to our lesson today, 10 sons, 1 daughter, and then he was going to have the 2 more a little bit later. But they composed pretty much what we call the 12 tribes of Israel, which is still in effect today. A lot of the Orthodox Jews can go back and tell you what tribe that they came from, and certainly through the Old Testament it's mentioned continuously. Actually, the first king was the tribe of Benjamin. So it was talked over and everything, except for a little bit of a adjustment there, because Joseph was never in the tribal line. His 2 sons took the place, and that's not even in today's lesson, but we'll probably get into that before Genesis is over. So now, after these 14 years, we find that he has these 10 sons and 1 daughter, and he has 2 wives and 2 servant wives. And between them all, they've had 10 sons and 1 daughter. And while all this is happening, Rachel is still barren. She is not able to conceive a child. So that is where basically our reading is going to start today. It's going to pop us right into chapter 30. And verse 25. So we've covered quite a few years here, and we've also covered a lot of things that had happened to him. Now, during these 14 years, there was a lot of created family setup, created a lot of jealousy, you can only imagine, a lot of hatred, a lot of strife, and what I think I could call a complete dysfunctional family. As they was all due to these 2 wives and these 2 concubine wives, and all of them having this mixed family there, where there was just jealousy, hatred, and strife just continuously. Now we're going to read in our books today. Your book's going to title it's kind of a strange setup, I thought, in a way, that they call it the past, the present, and the future. So they're your subtitles of your book: past, present, and future. So we're going to start reading there, and as we start reading, we're going to find in verse 25 that Rachel now conceives a child and gives birth to a son, and they name him Joseph. Okay. We're also going to find this as we read. We're going to find out that God has blessed Jacob immensely, but he has also blessed Laban through Jacob. So we're going to find that out. And then the next thing we're going to find out is that God starts putting or placing a desire in Jacob to return home, return to the promised land. So all this is sort of transpiring here at the same time, and we're going to find those 3 things listed. That Rachel's going to conceive and give birth to a son named Joseph, and she calls him Joseph. We're going to find out that God has blessed, that's the title of our lesson, blessed Jacob with a big family. Almost everything he touched turned out well, because God's blessings was upon him. And in return, Laban was blessed because of him, because he was the caretaker. He was the overseer of Laban's land. And so therefore Laban prospered because of what Jacob did. So let's just look at this lesson on page 57. And I think you'll find those 3 items here. It says, after Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way that I can return to my homeland." So there you get that desire that God's placing in him now to leave and go home. So Jacob says in verse 26, "Give me my wives and my children that I have worked for, and let me go. You know how hard I have worked for you." But Laban said, "If I found favor with you, stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." Now, you've seen the 3 things already that's been in here. That Jacob has his desire to leave, Jacob has been blessed, and Laban realizes that he also has been blessed because of Jacob. So here's what he said in verse 28. Then Laban said, "Name your wages," which is a switch. Usually he named them, but he sort of, I am going to lose a lot if my son-in-law Jacob leaves and takes his whole family with him. Where am I going to be? I can see that I have been so blessed while he was here, that God's hand was on him, and I don't want him to leave. So you name your wages. Well, at this point, I think Jacob could have named anything he had or Laban had in his power to give, and it would have been given to him. But it's interesting what he says, but we'll continue with that. So Jacob said to him, "You know how I served you, and how your herds have fared with me. For, Uncle Laban, you had very little before I came, but now your wealth has increased. The Lord has blessed you because of me. And now, when will I do something for my own family?" Well, we're going to look a little bit at that, just those couple phrases there, those couple scripture verses. And we're going to center a little bit on that word blessed that you talked about. You gave me some adjectives that you had described how you were blessed. And this bottom statement to all that was really this, that God blesses his children in multiple various ways. They're not only always material blessings, although God does choose to give material blessings. He chooses to meet our needs, and sometimes he even gives us more than what we need. So to define the word blessed was absolutely to bestow favor upon, or kindness, or guidance on. A little bit later, when the children of Israel were on, and this is something that you're real familiar with, when they were in the wilderness, God appeared to Aaron, and he said, Aaron, you are the high priest. When the children of Israel come to you, this is how you are to bless them. There's even a song on K-Love out about this now. It's taken from Numbers chapter 6, verses 24, 20 through 26, and it says, this is how you are to bless the Israelites. This is what you to say. The Lord bless you. That means favor you, care for you, show kindness, and the Lord keep you, make his face shine upon you, and be gracious unto you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Now that's a blessing that some pastors will even uses a benediction, and it's been given to Moses and Aaron way back at the beginning of time. So God chooses to bless us. God chooses to bless you and me. So, how has God blessed you? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Anybody want to attest to any of those ways that God has blessed you? Let's start thinking at least about the multiple ways that God has blessed us. Anybody want to just real quick? Okay, Bob, just yell out at me. Come on. All right, there's one. What else? Keep on going.
Born in a Christian family. Was led to this church.
Anybody else not been blessed? Come on, you guys. There's so many blessings out there that God has given to us. What about physically? He cares for us. He protects us. He guides us. He keeps danger from us. I mean, God has blessed us as a nation and as individuals, as families. How has God blessed you emotionally? I think I would be a basket case if it weren't for God. He has given me peace. He's given me joy. He's given me contentment. And I often stop and think, where would I be? I hate to see me if it hadn't been for Lord. I don't know where I'd be today, because I had such an independent spirit, wouldn't take anything from anybody, and I just wonder where I would be if it hadn't been for the Lord's blessing, the Lord's favor on me. What about spiritually? Certainly He's blessed us with eternal life. And so many times we just take this so for granted, don't we? Well, at the end of your book, you have some bullet marks. They're not bullets. The rest of you know what I'm talking about, don't you? If you've been online and you do any work, but that's what I call them. They're bullets. They're telling how we can apply the text. And one of them, the first one says, believers can be encouraged by past blessings. Let me tell you that you're not unusual. Even an unusual or an immature Christian, you are not, if you wake up some mornings and you are despondent, and you are discouraged, and you are in despair. Circumstances can do that to anyone. How are you going to get out of that? If you don't get out of it, you know where it leads you. It's going to lead you to self-pity. It's going to lead you to anger. It's going to, all kinds of things, jealousy, you name it, the whole scam of it. So we don't want to stay there. We're not happy with ourselves. How do I get out of that despondency? How do I get out of that despair? Anybody know? It's
to God.
okay, but let's go with the lesson. That's absolutely right. What should we do? Count your you got it. Count your many blessings. One of the first things to do is walk to the window or walk outside and just start with the blessings that you see. Oh God, that robin, which was a blessing to me today or this week. I looked out my window and a robin was building a nest in the bush out there. And I'm like, that robin, it looked like a newborn robin. It was a young robin. How does that robin know how to build that intricate nest? Looked at it. Oh my God, you guys have. They are perfect. It's hollowed out. I mean, how do they do that? God, that's a blessing. Start with those things and then start how God has blessed you. And I'm telling you that, actually the Bible tells us that if we give thanks, God is going to give us the blessings and God's give us. So that's one way to do it, is looking at this word bless. Okay, let's go on to the present, which is on verses 31 through 34. And they are on the bottom of page 59 and the top is 60. Now, I want you to see something that stands out very vividly here. And in this section of verses. And it's actually on the verse, when you turn your page on 60, here's what Jacob is going to say. My honesty will testify for me. Does that not sound like a change in Jacob? A transformation? Jacob's name meant deceit. And he was practicing deceit in every form of his life. And now he's going to say, basically, Laban, I'm a changed person. God is working on me. God is changing me. I'm changed. Now, just let my honesty speak for itself. Wow. That just stood out to me, that I underlined it in bright pink. Because, say bright pink, what a change that we're starting to see him. We're going to find out that God blesses him, God changes him, God trains him, and now God's going to plan how Jacob is going to be able to prosper enough that those blessings that God said, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to bless your family, I'm going to bless your livestock, you're going to be wealthy. But to this point, up to this point, Jacob is penniless. He doesn't have anything. He has a family, but he has no material blessings. And yet God had promised that I am going to bestow on you all the blessings that I promised to Abraham, your father Isaac. I'm going to give it to you. So we're going to find out, and this is interesting because God's going to be involved in this plan. This is a God thing. God is going to work, and basically all Jacob has to do is kind of sit back and watch how God's going to work this out. But let me tell you, though, that this is going to take another 6 years of Jacob's life. So when he gets ready to leave after this episode today, he would have been there for 20 years. 7 years, another 7 years, and now another 6 years that he has to stay. And this is what's going to happen now during those 6 years. Not only is he going to get wealthy, but God is going to work with him and mature him and grow him into the man that God wanted him to be. I read a statement about this, and it says, God doesn't pick only the qualified, but he more desires to make the chosen qualified, or make them a vessel fit for his service. Jacob certainly wasn't qualified to be an ancestral line, was he? He was probably the least choice. But God said, I'm going to take you, I'm going to make you, I'm going to mold you, I'm going to discipline you, I'm going to train you, and I'm going to make you into the man that I want you to be. And he's going to start doing this. To Isaac, that promise was given. And you'll find that in chapter 25, actually, verses 14 and 15. When Jacob was at Bethel, here's what God said: I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. That's Bethel. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. I am with you. I'll watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have done what I promised unto you. That's the promise that God gave Jacob. So now we're going to kind of see how God's going to work this all out. And let's just look at those verses on page 59, bottom page. So Laban asked, okay, what shall I give you? What's your wages? Name your wages, he told him. What shall I give you? So Jacob replied, oh, what shall I ask for my wages to be? Well, he said, you don't need to give me anything. If you do this one thing for me, I'll continue to shepherd and keep your flock. And here's the plan. Let me go through all of your sheep today and remove every sheep that is speckled and spotted, every dark-colored sheep among the lambs, and the speckled and the spotted among your female goats. That's going to be my wages. Now, they were the least valued. The speckled, if you'd get a sheep at that day, particularly the white wool, that was what was good. That was what brought the money in. Well, if you had a speckled striped black sheep, they're worthless. They were pretty much worthless. So they were the least of the flock. So what Jacob now is asking to do, he's saying, I want all the speckled and the black goat, or the speckled goats and the speckled sheep. You can keep the white sheep. You can keep the black goats. And I want you to go through the flock and take all of them. And then here's what he said. He did it. So in the future, he said, when you come to check on my wages, my honesty will testify for me. If I have any female goats that are not speckled or spotted, or any lambs that are not black, they will be considered stolen. Good, said Laban. And he said, let it be as you said. So what they did, they divided that flock up. They took all the speckled, all the striped, and gave them to Jacob. But Laban's sons took them on a 3 days journey to pasture, so that they would no way be able to intermingle at all. While Jacob now is going to stay for these 6 years, and he is going to shepherd Laban's flock. I had written down that Jacob had met his match. The deceiver was deceived previously. So what I think Jacob must have seen, is almost like he's looked in the mirror, and when he saw Laban, he saw himself. He said later in chapter 31, which we're not going to get into, he's going to say to the wives Leah and Rachel, your father has actually changed my wages 10 times. So the deceiver has met the deceived. The deceived had met the deceiver. There. So he said, I sort of like looking in the mirror and seeing it. So he was trained 20 years in being a shepherd. And I think, you remember how David, the shepherd boy, the many lessons that he learned as being a shepherd, laying out on the hillside, watching the sheep. The whole entire book of Psalms reflect that. And I kind of think that probably Jacob learned the same lessons as he laid out on the hillside, day after day after day after day, watching the sheep. And here's why I get this. When I turn to the end of Genesis, which is chapter 48, when Jacob's getting ready to die, and he blesses his children, here's what he says in verse 15. God, who has been my shepherd all the days of my life. He recognized that just like he shepherded the sheep, at the end of his life, he is able to say, God, you've been my shepherd. You've led me. You've trained me. You've disciplined me. You've protected me. You've been right with me continuously. And he makes that profane statement there that God has been the shepherd all the days of my life. Well, God is going to work this plan out. And here's the plan, which we've already talked about. You're going to separate the sheep and the goats. You're going to remove all the spotted and the speckled one from the herd. They will be mine. Your sons will take them on a 3-day journey, and you're going to be able to keep all the white sheep and the black goats. Number 3, I will be in charge of those, and I'll watch over them. And you will not find in my herd 3 days journey away any white sheep or any black goats. My honesty, I'm going to keep them apart. I am not going to intermingle in them in any way. And it's going to be obvious to you because you'll be able to see with your eyes, over here are all the speckled animals, and over here these are the perfect white and the perfect black goats. So in other words, he said, my honesty is going to speak for me. My honesty is going to be how I'm going to deal things. And to me, that was such a shocker to be in the Bible there. My honesty now, because his whole life was deceit. But by just these little insights on these little words, we've been able to see how God works in somebody's life and changes them, and also changes them from the inside out. Because this word honesty is very important. We could spend an hour talking about it. Because God wants honesty in every person. It's part of this integrity. He wants your life to be honest in every way, shape, or form. And however you deal with anybody, he wants honesty, he wants integrity. Actually, along this line, about a month or 2 ago, I was talking to somebody, not at our church, and the person wasn't from the church either, and I didn't really know the person. I knew of him, but he just made this statement: don't have so-and-so who is a member of this church, but not this church, the church that they were at. Don't ever do business with them. They're a cheat. They're a scoundrel. Now see, that's what Jacob was. And yet there are still believers that are still not practicing integrity, not practicing honesty. Believers should, and that was another one of our texts that we're applying, bullet number 2. Believers should demonstrate honesty in every area, including their business dealings. And thinking a little bit about that, nobody wants to be taken advantage of at all. God frowns on the lack of honesty, the lack of integrity. And if you have that trait in you at all, God's going to work on it. He is going to work on this because he doesn't want any of his representatives to be dishonest or lack integrity in any dealing. So that's a way that I think that we could look in here between the lines, and we found out that, hey, Jacob, you have changed. God has changed you. Wow, these last 20 years, God's been working on you, right? God is going to make you into the person that he wants you to be. And he's going to get down to the fine tuning of that. And he's going to work with honesty. He's going to work with insincerity. He's going to work all of your thinking and your planning modes. He's going to work with you. God's going to make you who he wants you to be. Well, we're going to finish up here very quickly on the last page, 62, and we're going to see how God is going to work all this out. How's God going to do this? And I have written down, God planned it, and now God's going to engineer it. He's in charge here. And so it says, whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob, here's what he did. The strong sheep, the strong goats, when they were breeding, he placed the branches in the troughs. He got these branches of certain, we'll name the names of the trees that he got. And as they would be breeding, as in front of the branches, as for the weaklings of the flock, he didn't put the branches out. So it turned out that the weak sheep belonged to Laban, and the stronger ones belonged to Jacob. And the Bible says the man became very rich. He had many flocks, female and male slaves, camels and donkeys. You're seeing God now prospering Jacob, and God fulfilling the promise that he had made to that. Little bit, if you look ahead in actually in chapter 31 again, it's a time when Jacob is going to take Rachel and Leah out away from Laban and say, hey, God said it's time to return. And here's one thing that he's going to say. Jacob told Leah and Rachel, this is 31 verse 10, in a breeding season, during the breeding season, I once had a dream, and which God said to me, the speckled ones will be your wage. Then all the flocks bore streaked young, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. Now leave and go back to Bethel. Here's what that means. God, all this deceit didn't go past unnoticed to God. It took time. And now God is working this out, that these, here's what it ended up, that the speckled and the streaked ones ended up to be the very strongest of the herd. And the black and the white were not. So basically, when it's all done and finished, with Jacob has got a huge herd, but they're very strong. And I think God did this because you remember, we'll talk about here in a little bit, next couple weeks, they had to start on a long journey back home. He had to have some strong animals that would have to walk that. God knew he was engineering this. He was working this out. And also those stronger animals would multiply much faster. So not only did God plan that now this flock that Jacob's going to have is going to be stronger, they're going to be more in number. So he became very rich. So this is basically what he did. When the stronger the flock would breed, Jacob placed branches in the water as they were before the watering troughs. The weak ones, he did not put out the branches. So it turned out that the white and the black, which were Laban's, were weak and few. And the speckled were strong and great in number. So Jacob ended up with a vigorous flock. God had miraculously worked this out for Jacob and his family. God has blessed, God has kept his promises once more. And in verse 43, which we finished with in our lesson today, it said he became very rich, had many flocks, female and slaves, camels, and donkeys. Now, you're all wondering, how did this happen? I have read and read and read. I'm not even going to go into that because nobody has figured out. But there has such a thing called selective reading, and they're working on that. Even now, they're working on that. So the three possibilities, if you want to know how God did what he did, to me, I don't care how he did it, but some of you might. It could be in genetic changes, or somebody said it even could be herbs that the trees would plant to make them stronger, like they would be taking vitamins and herbs into their system to make them multiply, to make them, because God told them what trees to get. Or it could just be something like selective breeding, and I'm not even going to go into there. If you're interested, you can Google that for yourself because it's way too complicated, and they haven't even come out. They've tried selective breeding here. But let me just finish with this. These 20 years, God started to change Jacob into the man he wanted him to be, a man to father the nation of Israel, and he will continue to do this in our next lessons till the day Jacob dies. So what's that mean to me? It made me think of a verse in Philippians 1:6 that said about me, being confident of this very thing, that he who has begun a good work in you will perform it or complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. Has God started a work in you? Has God started a work in me? The promise is He's going to complete it. He's going to complete it with or without your help. And let me tell you from experience, this is better if you comply to God and let Him work. Because He's going to do it regardless. He's going to do it for His name's sake. You've taken the name Christian. You've taken the name Christ. And He is going to perform in you what He wants in you with or without your help. And it's easier to help. Made me think of this song, and I'm just going to close with this. You know it. God is still working on me to make me what I ought to be. It took Him just a week to make the moon and stars, Jupiter and Mars. How loving and patient He must be, because He is still working on me.